This is Talking in Stations, an EVE Online podcast recorded live on twitch.tv/Talking in Stations. And this week's episode is sponsored by, what is it called? Fuzzworks. His newest tool. It is a fantastic tool. You may have seen it on the r/Eve subreddit. He just launched it today and has been actively working to implement new features, squash bugs, and make it as beneficial to the community as possible. It is called fuzzwork.co.uk/things. So what this is, it is a voting tool to let members of the EVE community create and then vote on various suggestions for CCP and the CSM to consider. It's a great tool. You should totally go and check it out if you have not already. It's very simple, much like a lot of things in EVE. You can vote and share your opinions, share your ideas. No guarantees on anything, but it's there, and I recommend it. But let's get into today's show. We have a fantastic panel of guests for you. But first, let's talk about who we have on the hosting side. I am Artemis Albosa, a member of Pandemic Horde. Also joining me today, as always, Ron USMC, a member of Test Alliance Please Ignore.
And I just want you to know that I'm wearing my suitable for business meetings shirt, which has a dino on a polo. So, showing the colors.
Right on. We also have, first up on the list of our fantastic guests, Dunk Dinkle, a member of the Brave Collective.
Hello.
How you doing today, Dunk?
I'm good. I made it home in time for this from work, leaving early.
I appreciate you leaving early. That's very kind of you to join us. We also have today Nydia Masters, also a member of Pandemic Horde.
I'm just here so I don't get fined.
But you're the one who does the finding in Pandemic Horde. Your story doesn't check out.
I know, ironic, isn't it?
All right, and rounding out the team today, we have Panda Solette, a current member of Pandemic Legion.
Good evening, guys.
Well, let's go ahead and just jump right into it. So all of our guests are here today because they are now, or were in the past, significant figures in their Nullsec Alliance's logistics wing. And I first want to sort of define the term logistics for people, because it's a term which has multiple meanings in EVE Online. So one that many people are familiar with are fleet logistics. These are remote repair ships. But what we're going to be discussing today is a little bit different, and I want to throw the question to you, the guests. What exactly do we mean when we talk about Alliance-level logistics, in your mind? Let's start with you, Dunk. What do you think?
Well, I mean, every group's going to kind of see it a little bit differently, but for us, it's basically there's two halves to it. One is the logistics of how do we deploy our structures, fuel our structures, arm our structures, handle, solve items, things like that, things in space that are important and critical to alliances, but are things that really a small trusted group has to oversee. And the second half is the logistics of moving things around, in which people want stuff imported. We want ships moved from different staging points, that kind of thing. So those are the two things in my mind that alliance level logistics covers.
Nydia, Panda, any additions or subtractions from that? What are your thoughts?
For me, it's very simply a case of, I used to be an FC more often back in the day too, so I know that side of it as well. But quite often FCs magically want doctrine ships to appear. They ask for them. They don't necessarily know where they come from. It's our job as the logistics guys to magically make them grow on trees in some cases. So we got to take care of that. We just got to make it.
Awesome. And Panda, you have a bit of a unique situation regarding logistics as a result of the group that you did logistics for, that group being Mercenary Coalition, which is no longer a thing anymore, or at least not in its old form. It has reincarnated itself, so to speak, in Pandemic Legion, but we'll leave that discussion for another time. So how did being a mercenary operation affect the need for logistics?
I mean, I guess especially in the early days, we were very, very mobile. So we would need to have the capability to pretty much uproot the entire alliance and deploy somewhere else with a day or two sort of notice. So it was really just making sure that we could get the assets we needed to do the fleets we wanted to do where they needed to be. And that's really about it, to be honest. It's just making sure we deliver that so that nobody notices that it's going on, really.
Very simple in theory, but when you're doing it for 1 to 3,000 nerds, it gets a bit complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of organization to make sure that you've got routes in place, you've got structures where you get roles sorted, you get, before we had all the structures, you needed to make sure you had all the null set groups giving your jump fighter tunes access to their stations, and with the war deck mechanics, that always meant out of alliance cut characters. So it got messy at times, and there was often a lot of organization before you could even, get a jump fighter moving. But it was just, I guess, part of the job, really.
I want to sort of start our discussion in talking not about the logistics that goes into making war. We'll get there, but I first want to start from the mindset of what logistics goes down when you're at peace. Because even though you're not moving ships from one staging to another most of the time, there's still quite a flurry of activity in the background of the industrialists and the Alliance logistics wing, at least from what I can tell from the outside. So I'd like to talk about you guys, specifically Nydia and Dunk, who your alliances are very large and they're both newbie friendly. So you have a constant influx of new players who need to be sorted out and moved into things, and of course they need new assets. And you also hold large swaths of space. So talk to me about what does your job entail when your alliance is at peace, when you're not actively fighting a war.
Well, getting new players into ships isn't really what we consider logistics. That's more of what our quote dojo group does. So a lot of what we're doing in the mainly peacetime is an awful lot of fueling. There's a lot of fuel blocks to move around for all the different structures, and then with the introduction of the new jump bridges, they require an awful lot, painful amount of liquid ozone. So there's a lot of fueling of those. And then with the Athenors, the way we run the Athenors, the um, only a small group of people can schedule the Alliance Athenors, and so we're running around when moons pop and rescheduling them appropriately. So we do an awful lot of that, and it's a smaller group of us. You can count them on one hand, and we have a few Google Docs. And Norman, one of our guys, has written a thing called Structure Bot that keeps track of when things are starting to run out of fuel. So it's an awful lot of fueling and resetting things.
Let's pause for a moment and talk about the team that you guys have behind you, because managing the logistics for 1 to 3,000 man alliance, even bigger in some cases, or even smaller ones when it's the amount of movement that MC did back in the day, it takes a lot of work, and that's work that not just one person can handle. So what's your team of folks like? What's your support team like?
Well, in my case, in Pandemic Horde, we have a few people that do different things. There's essentially we have a probably a dozen people or so that are responsible for logistics in one form or another at the high end, and we have a bunch of people that typically take one portfolio. Like one person is generally responsible for fueling most, if not all, the structures. One person is responsible for production of most of the structures. Another person is responsible for maintaining the Athenors, and so on. So we sort of divvy up the responsibilities that way. This way, no one really gets overly stressed out about what has to be done, and also allows for a lot of specialization in that these people are very good at those specific tasks.
Panda, how about you?
I mean, I guess the way we were set up in MC, it was more we were more moving around and being too worried about structures. So it was more about having that sort of burst capability to be able to move lots of people very quickly instead of the sort of steady thing. So we probably had about 10 to 15 jump fitter dudes, and that we're also doing that sort of thing because we were also responsible for seeding a lot of the doctrines. So as well as actually moving people's personal shit, we had to move a lot of the alliance assets and doctrines that we were then putting up on contract and getting all the fuel and stuff sorted. So yeah, there was probably about 10 or 15 dudes that we had doing jump fritters, and other few dudes that we had responsible for buying things and being responsible for the ISK and that sort of thing. So yeah, you just need to make sure that the people you've got doing that are guys that you trust, obviously, because you're giving them billions and billions of people's personals and alliance assets. And it's in a very, it is very easy for, I guess, the logistics thing to be a place that people can very quickly and easily steal a lot of assets from. So trust is a really big deal when it comes to doing these sort of logistics things.
That's an interesting thing that you bring up. If I recall correctly, it was the advertisement for Amsterdam a few years back. It was the most valuable thing in Eve is trust. I want to quickly sort of take a bit of a tangent and ask you guys, have you ever had instances where somebody went in, joined your logistics crew, or got in through some nefarious means and then had a massive sort of alliance level theft? Has that ever happened? Or are you able to secure against it?
Well, in our very earliest days, there wasn't much structure, and so there were some people that walked off with stuff, and there was probably early people that, when the old moon mining system, were skimming a lot off the top. But in the last probably 3 to 4 years, we haven't seen any problems like that as we kind of established uh, a more structured system of who's in charge of what, and the people that were there had been there for several years and were more trusted, and people had relationships built up.
I mean, I don't think in MC we ever had any issues with any of our logistics dudes stealing things. Again, it's just, but I think especially as you get on, you'd met a lot of these people at various Eve meets, so the trust element was really there. So we'd never had an issue with any alliance theft from that side.
Definitely in previous corps, I've seen people sort of run off with, I use the term loosely, large amounts, like under 10 billion. But in larger alliances, especially pandemic core, this has never really happened. You sort of expect a certain amount of skimming off the top. Hey, I'll take a mod here. I'll take a little ship here. It's expected essentially as a cost of doing business, but we've never had an incident where someone's run off with a large amount, even 10 billion is, because it's never happened.
Wow, I am genuinely impressed. Is this because you guys
Honestly,
have like
so am I.
security tools, or is it just you really vet the people that you? This goes to everybody. Do you have security tools like using the ESI, or do you just harshly vet who handles what?
There's definitely both in our case in Pandemic Horde. There's a certain amount of vetting, a certain amount of long-standing trust, a certain amount of security as well, and compartmentalizing.
Dunk?
Yeah, I mean, we do have those tools, and we do look at it sometimes, but the people who are trusted with the most risky of logistics, right? Who can unanchor or transfer a keep star, that is extremely tightly held by people that have been there a very long time. And so, um, it's a widening circle. The less risk, the more people we can allow to do it. Like, we can allow a lot of people to gun some of our citadels, but only literally, people on one hand can unanchor our citadels. So it's kind of the amount of impact a role can have. The greater it is, the fewer trusted people there are. But a lot of it's personal relationships.
So it
That
would
just
be
can't.
like a Judgment Day level offense if things went wrong.
Yeah, it would have to be I mean, pretty striking thing for someone who could unanchor a brave Keepstar to turn on the alliance and do what the judge did. But I think every alliance is like that. There's not a whole bunch of people that are trusted with the kind of power that somebody like the judge in his former position held. And when those people flip, it upends the game.
Really quickly, before we move on to what happens when alliances go to war, I want to quickly sort of try to provide a frame of reference for just how much ISK and just how much stuff you guys are handling and moving about. And I don't really know a good way to do that because I've never done this logistics thing before. I've never run the jump freighters, haven't really been involved on the industry side of things. So, can you guys help me out here? How would you quantify the amount of activity, the amount of stuff you're doing just on a day to day basis?
It's a hard question. I mean, the structures themselves, you can look them up on, Eve Marketeer or any of the sites. I mean, these structures range from half a billion to 150 billion. All the modules that go on them. There's rigs that go into these things. Some of the T2 rigs are easily 50 billion a pop. And so there's an awful lot in the structures themselves in terms of cost, but that's not usually a daily thing. Like you put up a Fortizar and you spend a few billion on fittings and you're good to go. It's really the fuel blocks, amount of fuel blocks and liquid ozone we need to keep everything fueled. That just adds up. And so we're spending billions and billions per week buying from line members fuel blocks that they've made and then running them around. So I think that's the biggest thing is sometimes you'll see the corporate contracts in our logistics corp and it's like, oh, there's 10 billion in contracts that we have to click yes to just to get some fuel blocks from people. Doesn't seem like much now with my jaded eyes, but I think to the new player thinking that we're spending billions and billions just on fuel blocks is a staggering amount.
I definitely have to agree with Doug in that in our case also it's quite often the fuel blocks that in sheer volume alone, quite literally in cubic meters, that we have to move around across these structures that have to keep fueled. It's immense. But if you look at the fuel usage of a Keepstar versus the fuel usage of an Astor House, it's exactly the same number. And anchoring an Astor House versus anchoring a Keepstar, while technically is yes, one is a lot bigger and a little more complicated, the amount of work involved is actually not too different. But to give you an example of in terms of what actual work I've done, I've had days where I've had to anchor a single Raitaru in a system. I had one day where I had to anchor 45 across an entire region. So it's an amount of work also involved that's a little difficult, not just hauling from one station to another.
I kind of wanted to ask, about the new jump gates. Or are they jump bridges are the old ones, jump gates are the new ones, right? What's been the like ozone consumption? And I'm kind of teasing because I saw Dunk the other day, I think it was in local. Does anyone have any ozone or something? I think he was just kidding, but I'm kind of wondering what is on the alliance level the amount of ozone that these things are burning every day.
In the case of Pandemic Horde, we have a bit of an extensive network that we've worked quite hard to keep and to build. Two things come to mind immediately is that one, there's no more jump fatigue. So people are using these a lot more with bigger ships all the time, back and forth, back and forth. So they're consuming a lot more ozone. I believe the ozone consumption is the same or roughly the same as the old pause jump bridges, but the Ansiblex themselves actually can hold a near infinite amount of ozone, but people are just using them so much more across multiple jump gates in different systems. The other issue is that the old jump bridges, you could just warp a freighter right into the pause shield and drop it. You didn't have to go anywhere near the structure. Now you have to. So there's also, not only is it more complicated to fuel them physically, it's also a little bit more dangerous.
Yeah, it's as someone who fuels them, it's this. You get quite upset with the knuckleheads that are running their Nidhogger through the jump bridge so they can save a few extra ISK on on their fuel blocks or on their isotopes, and they're running it through the jump bridges that we got to refuel. So it can be frustrating in that aspect, but yeah, it's just in some systems like the jump bridges are chock full because that's a system that we mine ice and refine it, and so people have all this extra liquid ozone. They're like, I'm helping the alliance. So one jump bridge might have 20 million cubic meters or 20 million liquid onos in it, and then a more far off region, it's always running low because it's hard to get out there.
So would you say 5 million ozone a day, 1 million ozone a day is
No,
being used?
No, it's probably a few 100,000 on an average day. Um, but it goes up and down. Again, you move a bunch of battleships through, it burns up a lot more than guys moving their explo ships through. So it varies all over the place. Our structure bot tells us when it's less than 1 million in a jump bridge, and then we kind of go, okay, we got to get over there soon in the next couple days, or they're going to run out and everyone will scream.
I don't have exact figures off the top of my head, but I would probably easily say in pandemic order we easily use at least 1 million units per day across the entire network. More so if we have big strata.
I'm
That's
mostly
really
curious.
go ahead.
So I know Pandemic Horde recently switched over to charging for using the jump gates, right? So now instead of doing it for free, and so the Alliance foots the entire bill for the LO, you pay a little bit of ISK based on the amount of liquid ozone your ship costs to jump through the jump gate. Is that a thing that you do in Brave Newbies as well?
Yeah, we do it not as much to pay for anything, but in theory, I don't think we've pulled this off yet. In theory, if we were to pull the transaction logs and we could see the the fees paid, since they scale with the size of the ship, we could get some analytics about how many ships and what kind of ships are going through the jump bridges, which in theory helps us know what's going on. But we're all so busy we never get around to that. But that's the only reason we charge for it, is so that eventually we can track it.
Oh, wow. That is really cool. Well, other things that are cool, spaceships blowing up. I really want to talk about what happens when we get to war, because that is personally what's most interesting to me in this game. I'm sorry, guys, but space trucking is not my deal. Let's talk about spaceships blowing up and how you facilitate that. And I think we're going to start with Panda here, because that was one of the things that was great about Mercenary Coalition in its heyday. You were always fighting. You were always going from contract to contract to contract. We had a home technically, but home was really where the next campaign was supposed to start. And let's talk about like how did that happen? How did MC Logistics facilitate the entire alliance packing up and moving across the universe in 24 to 48 hours? Walk us through step by step if you could. How did that happen?
Yeah, okay. I mean, we'd know beforehand where we were deploying to. So, we'd want to know like a week or so before. And we'd then go and be scouting routes, getting stuff sorted, getting some, sino paths all sorted out so we know how we're going to get from where we currently are to where we need to go. In conjunction with that, the FCs would be looking at the doctrines that they want to use. So either the existing ones that we have, or for certain deployments, also looking at new ones. And if then we needed new ones, we would look at, do we want to build that where we're moving, or do we want to ship it out? So generally, a lot of the T1 stuff, we'd see if we could try and build that locally because it was just easier to build the R and take that out that way. So before we moved, we probably put about a week's worth of planning into it, just to try and figure out what we'd be doing. And there would be a few guys on sort of the logistics team that would know about this. Not all of them, just a couple of them that we sort of, I guess, trusted most, that we would use to start pre-staging, getting fuel dumps and LO and that in position, so that when we put the announcement up and tell the alliance we're going, we've got sinos in place, jump fitters are all ready to go, and we can literally move everyone's stuff immediately. In the early days as well, when we were a bit less reliant on capital ships because we just didn't really have as much of that capability, and moving from the entire north to the entire south in 2 days with capital ships at the time was quite difficult without structures and taking them through nullsec. So we had also relied on a decent amount of people who owned jump freighters who weren't part of logistics, basically just joining us in fleets and coming with us. We'd give them contracts to move and they would literally jump to your signals. So we did rely on having quite a high proportion of our members that use jump freighters. And we also, because I guess one of the differences seems to be that MC Logistics was entirely centralized. We ran the entire thing through the alliance for free, basically. So to move your stuff from one place to the another, we never charged, and we the alliance footed the bill for all the fuel that was used. So that was really done because we were so nomadic in the early days that we would only be spending a week in some places before we're suddenly moving. And if to be charging our line members for that seemed a bit ridiculous when the alliance was getting paid to be there, basically. So that was how that sort of came about, and we kept that going as we, I guess, just continued on. We kept that jump freighter service, and we managed to retain a lot of those people in it. And I think that sort of helped with a lot of the early success with the sort of this iteration of MC, because we were able to, tell people within 40 hours where to go.
Sorry, I just want to clarify. You guys get a week notice to move?
Well, ideally, that's what we asked for. It's not always what we got. There would be certain FCs that would tell you 12 hours before a fleet, can we get 100 battleships here, please?
Can I join your corp?
Well, we're not there anymore.
Well, I just pointing out, this is a bit of a running joke in Pandemic Horde, where we have to sometimes come up with a whole doctrine within less than 24 hours. I once infamously had to come up with 200 maelstroms in about 10-hour notice for an op that they knew about a week before. And I did it, but I was really angry about it.
I think, I guess, one of the way MC was organized was that I knew what was going on there. So they had logistic representation on those things. So I was in the channels with the FCs or RFCs, so I knew what ops they had planned. And I think that made a big difference, because if your logistics wing knows what your FC wing is wanting to do, then you can preempt that. So there was times we would see, oh, they're looking at wanting these things. So if it was things that we know we'll use eventually, we'd just maybe start to build them early or have some stocked up somewhere.
Yeah, I concur. That's a remarkable thing that I have not experienced. And usually it's, I need 100 fitted Hyperions by tomorrow morning. Is that possible? Or does anyone have 6 iHubs ready to go? It's usually some ridiculous request. We get no warning, and then there's an angry FC saying, "Why can't we be prepared?" Question mark, question mark, question mark.
Yeah, and I think that part of like the success there also needs to be on the FCs for actually making sure that there was communication going all the time. And for the majority of the time we did get that, there was always, oh crap, we know suddenly realize these guys are going to be bringing a different thing tomorrow. We need an entire new doctrine for it, and these things always crop up. But most of the time that doesn't happen. Most of the time you know what they're to generally fly, and you have prepared counters for it. So you don't normally need an entire new doctrine, at least at zero notice.
So, for the majority of the time that you were running things for Mercenary Coalition, if I recall correctly, it was before the changes to fuel consumption for all capital ships and notably for jump freighters as well, where it significantly increased the cost to move things. And so it seemed
Yes.
like groups started opting for, instead of moving all of your doctrines, you would instead build them in location in your new deployment zone. I know MC tried that. Dunk and Nydia, do Horde and Brave do similar things when you guys deploy? Instead of just moving everything, you build in location?
In our case, it really depends what it is. If we're going relatively far, say we can't take a wormhole or we're staging out of a new area for a new campaign, yes, we will typically build in location for 2 reasons. Exactly what you said, that the cost of logistics of moving these ships, first of all, that are rigged to, you're just cracking the rigs or you're moving carriers. It's not fuel efficient. It's not cost efficient. Um, Building in location generally is almost always a lot easier and cheaper, for the simple fact that you can only get like 6 battleships in a jump freighter, for example. Whereas if you're bringing minerals, you could get 50 or 100. It really depends.
Yeah, it's. I think we've done it one time. We've been able to build out away, but most of the time we're hauling stuff in. Since we've been partnering with Test, they're much better about when we go on deployment. Test will set up the Raitarus and the Sotoyus, and we can generally use their stuff when we're on a common deployment, things like that. But it's a big commitment. I mean, the alliance has to spend a lot of billions to set up an infrastructure, and it takes a few days to get it anchored and then the rigs attached and all that kind of stuff. Otherwise, you're just bleeding money on this stuff.
especially with things like T1 battleships, if they're heavily used and they're so easy to produce, it just never seems economical to move them.
I'm curious a bit about we've mentioned briefly in the past that MC Log, Mercenary Coalition's Logistics, they ceded most of the contracts for contract ships. From my experience in Pandemic Horde, it seems like it's mostly crowdfunded, so to speak. So alliance members who want to help the alliance or want to make a bit of ISK in profiteering, so they build for cheap and then sell for a little bit more on alliance or corp contracts. That's how doctrine ships get seeded. Is that entirely the case? Is it more centralized? Then also we'll head to Dunk and ask what you guys do in Brave Newbies.
In Pandemic Horde, we typically firmly believe in the concept of a free market economy. And the economy tends to correct itself. You'll never really see anyone charging a whole doctrine fit for 50% over GDA price. It just doesn't happen because someone will come in and will just very simply undercut them, and no one really complains too hard about it. It's just the market adjusts itself. People pay the prices they want to pay. But we have a lot of contract seeders who do it for the different corps in the alliance and the alliance itself. So they communicate with each other. They see what's needed on the market, and it just sort of works out. It's rare that there's any sort of big drama about it.
Dunk, how about you in Brave Newbies?
It's very similar. All of the kind of ships and doctrine ships on contracts is all run by private pilots or groups that have banded together to make money doing it. So the alliance itself doesn't put them up. It's almost always someone's going to put up a bunch of feroxes or whatever the flavor du jour is of ships, and they're to doctrine and people buy them. It's one of the things I recommend that newer players that want to get into this, even if you're just making frigate fittings, they'll all sell and you'll make a profit on it. So you don't have to have a bunch of skills to buy things, put them together, and then put them up for contracts, and they almost always sell out.
Interesting. So, because you're doing that, what happens when an FC whelps a fleet? And so suddenly now you've got 200 nerds who need a bunch of new spaceships. Are contracts typically able to handle that sudden demand, or how's the reaction time there? Do your FCs sort of just know if one FC whelps their Megathron fleet or whatever, then the next FC knows, okay, well, I can't use that doctrine for a week or so until everybody gets their ships back into their hangars? Or is that a concern for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try and find the graphic I made of this that we joke about internally, but it usually goes something like this. Something happens, and the FC, he says, get into Tal Wars. Everybody into Tal Wars. That's going to be our counter. And then there aren't enough Tal Wars on contract or market. And then there's a lot of ranting by the FC, and they get very upset, and God damn it. And then they come into the indie chat channels and God damn it, and we need this. What's wrong with you guys? And so then the machine starts cranking up. And then the people who are building, the people who are importing, and eventually we get a gigantic market flood where everyone is losing money because we're selling it below GDA prices. And then inevitably the FCs will close that doctrine and not use that doctrine anymore, and everyone will be stuck with this stuff. And then the industrialists and the haulers are upset because they lost money, and then they don't stock the market, and then we have a fight, and the FC comes into comms and says, why didn't we have any Jaguars? And the whole cycle begins again. So that's the usual thing I've seen.
Sounds rough, man.
I think that most FCs in 2019 are a little more understandable about how the logistics side of things works, instead of necessarily demanding things grow on trees. But I do, remember one specific incident quite a long time ago where it was a case of the main fleet was still in warp, and the secondary FC was already in the industry channel saying, build 200 Hurricanes, we're going to lose them all.
That is pretty crazy. So we've talked about managing, like, building on site versus not building on site. And for a while, I was doing some of the theory crafting and fitting things for Mercenary Coalition. And the way we did it there is I was also constantly talking back and forth with Panda about, okay, if we wanted to use ship XYZ as our doctrine, is that possible? Is there enough on the market? Could we build it locally? How would we source this stuff? Specifically when it came down to, we would use sort of higher end dead space and faction modules. And so we had to go through and look, is there even enough on market to seed a full-fledged doctrine on this? And that was just for back when MC was around 500 pilots. Do you have similar issues when you try and launch a new doctrine within Pandemic Horde or Brave Newbies, where you want to launch a thing and there's physically not enough stuff in Eve at the time to launch that doctrine?
This is this is definitely a problem for very specifically meta modules on ships. If you need something like a compact module to fit, and the fitting doesn't work without it, and you have to change like 3 different mods, these meta modules are not always well seated, or they don't drop that commonly in the game, and GDA will simply run out of them before you get to 100 fits in some cases, and this becomes a big problem.
Yeah, I concur. Sometimes our combat FCs come up with something for like Logi, and they'll be like, "Oh, this will work with a Pith dash B something something something," and then I'll have to chime in and say, "There's only 17 for sale in all of Eve. We can't make a doctrine on this," and then they roll their eyes. But so it's definitely a problem.
Nice. I feel like the majority of your guys' time is spent sort of putting out dumpster fires that are started by FCs and like campaign commanders or whoever who wants to go and blow stuff up or wants to try out some new thing. And then you sort of have to dampen their spirits a bit and like bring them back down to earth. Say, yes, we know that sounds really cool, but it's not actually possible, at least not right now. Is that a good characterization of your job?
Well, I'm kind of joking about it here, but I think we've kind of found a middle ground where most of our doctrines have what we would call the optimal fit, which is exactly the way they want it in a perfect scenario. And then there's kind of a step down, which it's a little easier skills, a little less, a little easier for us to produce. And so now that we have kind of 2 tiers of doctrine, it makes it a little bit easier that if we don't have absolutely perfect for the FC, at least we have something for the FC they can use. So that's kind of the medium place we've got to. But look, the FCs do a lot of content creation. I don't want to slag them too much, but if I'm here with other fellow make it happen people, I'm just kind of, telling funny stories. But um, it does, they do change their minds from time to time.
I've definitely had days where I've had to tell and remind the FCs, if you give me 12-hour notice for an op and you expect 200 ships, I might be able to get you half that. Give me 24 hours, I'll get you a whole.
I think
I want
we've had conversations like this before, Artemis, between when you were trying to put fits together, and many.
Yeah, I
But
recall many a conversation where you've dashed my hopes and dreams over the inability of our alliance to fuel it.
I mean, I think the thing is that we also want to go and kill lots of stuff. So, it's not that we're trying to stop things from happening, because most of those fleets were probably on them as well with you.
Yeah, that's another question I was going to get to a bit later, but now's a good time. Like, is all of your time sort of absorbed with Slack warrioring or Discord warrioring or so be it, and then you're running around with your jump freighters or deep space transports fueling things? Or do you have time to fly on fleets? Like, what's a day in the life of a hardcore logistics dude like in your particular group?
I'm happily retired now.
So, what was it like, Panda? Back when you were running Mercenary Logistics, what was a day in the life of Panda Select and MC Log?
I mean, a lot of the time was just making sure that, because we were very heavily centralized, I think, compared to a lot of other alliances. Just making sure we had contracts stocked, we had fuel in place, we had all our jump freighter dudes were moving stuff as they were meant to be. There wasn't contracts that had been sitting for sort of weeks or anything that hadn't been moved yet. Because I guess one of the different, like, all moving contracts went to MC Log, so I could see how many outstanding contracts there was, where they were moving from and to, who'd been moving them, if I needed to ping more jump fighter pilots to try and get them to be a bit more active in moving stuff, or if we were flying and just sorting out the refueling of stuff. So I guess there was times where by the time the fleet was pinged, you just didn't want to go. You were just fed up with Eve by that point. But most of the time you do it because you want to take part. You're wanting to go and fly on the fleets with the people that you're having fun, and you're having fun with the people you like to play the game with them. So it's your way of contributing. FCs have all the pressure of running the fleets and making sure everything goes right, and it's another way you can contribute to help your alliance. And I think a lot of the logistics guys like that because they weren't FCs. Some of them, didn't like that sort of thing, but they want to help and they like to just do it quietly in the background.
Media, what's a day in the life like for you?
Management of time is really important. I don't know anyone on the logistics team that isn't a PvPer by trade. Every single one of the PvPs, quite a few of them are actually outright FCs. But I think for me, in my case, I like to sort of do a lot of planning ahead of time. And if I'm not hauling myself, I'll arrange for someone to haul. And a lot of this is done on things like downtimes in fleets. You go to a fleet, you could be there for 3 hours and it's 15 minutes of sheer terror and panicking because you're being shot at and you're mashing the rep me button 50 times and driving your logistics people up the wall. But in between those, there's a lot of downtime to sort of do a little bit of planning, a little bit of multitasking. Hey, I need to prepare this. I need to do this. I'll arrange for this to be hauled, or I'll be on and out hauling it too. So management of time is important. Otherwise, it really does become a case of you're playing Euro Trucker forever. And for some people, they really actually do enjoy that. I've met those people. They are a bit weird, honestly. But I do like to PvP still once in a while. I don't go on as many fleets as I used to because I've been playing the game forever. But it is something I need to do. And like I said, I don't want to play Euro Trucker.
Dunk, how about you?
Well, I'm usually running an awful lot of clients simultaneously. I think I have 7 accounts, so it's not unusual for them all to be logged in. I run a lot of Sino alts for the legacy people, but it's also useful for moving stuff around. So for me, I get up in the morning, do some Sino stuff, do some industry stuff, some logistic stuff, and same thing in the evenings. Usually, I'm in a situation that if something good is going to happen, hey, we need some dreads to drop, or there's a fight local in our staging system, I can pause what I'm doing with my logistics work and then switch to the combat. But sometimes I'm just in the middle of something, right? I'm moving something that's very important. I got to be focused, and I have to get out of the fighting comms to make sure that's completed well.
Well, and you're also like recording not the sodas and running for the CSM this election cycle. So like, there's a bunch of other stuff on top of that you're also doing, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, the videos are fun. I know people like them, but I might do it once a month. The CSM will be a challenge, um, but yeah, I mean, this is what I enjoy doing. My daughters are grown up and moved out of the house, so I have more free time, and it's okay. But I still get time in to go on fleets and fight. It's just I can't sit there on every strat op and be focused on it because sometimes they want the logistics people in reserve. Like, do you have that Astra house ready to go, or we may need to drop an iHub, and so you have to be ready with that stuff. Where you're just sitting for hours waiting and nothing happens.
I've always been curious about that. There was one time I recall back during World War B where we needed to drop an iHub because we were winning a solve timer, but nobody anticipated that we were going to be winning the solve timer, and so I sort of had to quickly run over to Jita with my deep space transport, grab an iHub, and then burn all the way back through nullsec and like get to the system to drop the iHub. Is there any like situations like that where you guys have been in sort of an active combat situation where suddenly your fleet commander or something needs X, Y, or Z, and he needs it right freaking now, and you have to work your magic to make that happen? Is that a situation you run into?
This is literally every pandemic horde fleet there is.
Okay.
it's a bit of like I said, it's a running joke. Is as much as I do like some of our FCs, some of them don't really plan beyond kill mails. And so whenever we need an iHub or a TCU or any sort of structure or any sort of equipment, it's all of a sudden it's like, oh, we need that. Oh, can you go get it? I'm like, bro, I just gotta make it work.
Yeah, we've been better with it recently, but sometimes it's like we need it right now. We didn't expect we won this timer. We want to drop an iHub or whatever they want to put in, and then suddenly you're trying to get in a Rourke wall so it can jump into system, and then you ask the FC for a Sino in, and they're like, we don't have one. Burn your own over, and so it can be frustrating because you're just like, all we needed is a little bit of planning, and we would have been all ready to go, and instead we're scrambling and putting a lot more ISK at risk than we needed to.
I think we always got kind of lucky, to be honest. Most of our FCs were normally organized for these sorts of things. Most of the time, there's a few times where you're in the middle of the fight while you're jumping your jump freighter in to replace all the ships that we're just about to lose, so you can undock again. Especially during World War B, when there was constant timers and fights. But we got quite lucky most of the time in that our FCs were actually organized, which was nice.
Yeah, I'm with Nids here. I want to go back in time and join MC. Seems much more pleasant.
Much more relaxed anyway. You hear it
I
in his voice.
I wouldn't call it relaxed. Panda is a very relaxed dude unless you try and seed a doctrine with the wrong kind of Dead Space modules on it. But the MC was not. Maybe it was a relaxed place. In any case, I. So one of the things that I genuinely enjoy about Eve is when you get a bunch of people who are really good at one particular thing, and you can sit in comms with them and let them sort of have shop talk. So you guys will just get started on a conversation and then go off and start talking with random jargon that I don't even understand. But it's really freaking cool to listen to it. Now, I can't really make that happen here, but one of the reasons I enjoy that so much is because every once in a while you get just a little tiny tidbit, a little piece of useful information, a pro tip, if you will, that will slip out and you'll hear it and you'll remember it and it'll be extremely useful for you down the road. So, like, if you guys imagine you talking to some new pilot who wants to jump into the indie thing, or some extremely excited new bro to your alliance, he wants to help the alliance move it along, what's a pro tip for them? How can they help the alliance logistics effort, or how can they do alliance logistics better, so to speak, if you're talking to another person who's doing the same thing that you are?
I guess the two things would be, with all of the logistics ships, you're going to have to choose a race that you're going to run those ships so you can swap ships back and forth. So once you kind of choose a cargo hauling race you want to go with, to kind of put it on all those characters. And then the second thing is you can never, never, never have enough Sino alts that can fly an interceptor and move around. Like, that's one of the things we bump into, is just getting the Sinos in place and out of the way locations. You have to basically scepter there and then be able to Sino things in.
And all your Sinotunes should use the exact same interceptor and be able to use the exact same fit. Otherwise, it's a nightmare.
What was the group that used to have, it was Pandemic Legion, right? Where they had some entire separate alliance that all this alliance was Sinotunes. Am I remembering correctly? Now I feel like I'm just making things up. Okay, let's move on. Midia, do you have
I
any
wouldn't be
pro tips?
surprised.
If you're new and just getting into things, don't try to seed whole doctrine ships. Everyone tries to seed a jackdaw and the prices change, or they're just not being used and not being whelped enough, and you're just suddenly out a crap ton of ISK. Things that are always needed are small modules like, oh, hey, they're bringing Amar ships. We suddenly need EM hardeners, but there's none for sale. These little modules that, are common to every ship, hardeners, warp disruptors, damage controls, things like that, are always going to be needed on the market. So seeding those things, especially when you're new and you're poor, is always a good idea.
Awesome. Are there anything like I know so little about doing logistics that I feel like we have almost certainly missed some very important key aspect to what you guys do or a problem that you constantly deal with, but I just don't even know it's there. Are we missing something?
I think there's a few little things that are frustrating, that not a lot of people are going to run into. But like an example is if jump bridge is knocked into reinforcement and then it comes out to online the module to put it back online, it just can't be anyone with ACL rights. It literally has to be a director of the corp that actually owns the jump bridge itself. And so things like that can be painful because you might not only have a very few handful of directors that can do that. Things like that you only bump into if you're doing this at a very small group of people, but it can be tremendously frustrating.
One of the fun little things about these new jump gates is a lot of people don't realize, and I had to actually explain to several of my directors quite a few weeks after they came out on Tranquility, was that they're not like the old jump bridges where it was a 30-minute process or so to simply realign them to a new jump bridge. It's actually about a 3-hour process now, and it's not fun. It's
Really?
actually gone backwards in terms of flexibility and the ease of.
Wow. Here I am sitting in my chair complaining about how Eve has shrunk because of all these fatigueless jump kits. I didn't realize like how much of a pain these things can be.
Well, but
For the
it's
consumer, it's better. For the logistics guys, it's a little bit more of a night.
yeah. If I was to ever make it onto the CSM, there's a few things I would bring up with them to make life easier for some of these hardest working people. Things like that, like being able to online some things, and then also things that people don't think about that logistics people have to think about. Like when you're anchoring a structure for the first time, you have to orient it very carefully, and the FCs or whoever's in charge is telling you where they want it oriented. But then things change, and you can't reorient a structure. You can unanchor it and put it back in place, but that's a huge pain in the ass and it kills your rigs. So to have an option, even a high-priced option that you could run to reorient a Citadel would make life so much easier for logistics people.
I remember when the Citadels first came out, one of the things they talked about was all the different docking ports that you come out of, especially like on the Astra House where they're like crisscrossed eyes. One of the things they talked about was being able to set a default undock point, like for single ships coming out, and that just never materialized. And on an Astra House, it's a little more annoying because they kind of crisscross, so you could end up in weird directions if you're undocking a whole fleet. On a Fortizar, it's not obvious. You don't come straight out; you come on a bias, and a few other structures are like that too.
Curious. All right. Well, that was been like extremely informative. There is a bunch of stuff that I didn't know ever like had to do with anything in this game, but now we know. And I feel even more sorry for I am sorry. I don't feel sorry for you. I am much more thankful for the amount of work that you guys do, such that I can just log into Eve, buy a ship off of contracts, and go and whelp it in a fleet. That is incredible. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and hop into some news really quick then, get everybody updated on what's been going on, what these guys, the conflict they have been facilitating, if you will. And first, we want to talk about an area of space which Dunk is local to. We're talking about the war down south between Winter Coalition, headed up by Fraternity Dot, and Legacy Coalition, of which Dunk Dinkle's Brave Newbies, or pardon me, Brave Collective is a member, headed up by Test Alliance Please Ignore. And things were most recently described as a stalemate that I have heard. Ron, you're flying down there as well. How's it seem to you?
Well, I just, would say that Sino-jammers hate fun. Sino-jammers hate Eve. And it's pretty much a stalemate. It's interesting. We're doing a lot of skirmishing back and forth, but there's no solve loss or solve gain or any of that. It's really just a lot of 50 to 150 to 200 man fleets versus each other, kind of going back and forth, and lots of skirmishing. It's pretty interesting, right? Because there's a combination of time zone tanking for both sides, as well as Elo and those damn Munins. So it's been a lot of fun for us, but it's really a kind of a stalemate.
I can't believe I completely forgot about Sinojammers. This is something I thought to bring up earlier. So, the past year or two in EVE, I think, could really be described as the player base dealing with citadels. As citadels change, the entire way this game and its combat happens has changed with it. And a lot of that impacts the way that you guys do your alliance logistics, specifically things transitioning from working with pauses to working within citadels. Are, in your opinion, are citadels better than pauses, worse than pauses, different and not comparable? Like, how do you guys feel you're ending up now that we're most of the way through the citadel roadmap?
Overall, citadels and these flex structures and other upwell structures, as a whole, in a very general, broad sense, are superior to pauses in every single way from the logistics point of view. There's a few quirks with them that, hey, I wish this was like in the pause, but from a broad point of view, absolutely superior in every single way.
Yeah, the night that or the whatever whenever they finally kill off pauses for good and they simply don't exist anymore in the game, I'm going to get blind drunk because it's going to be a great day.
Goodbye, good riddance.
Also, one more thing I wanted to ask regarding the Cytojammers thing. So you went from one pause module, which was a Cytojammer, to now you can have 3 anchored in any system at a time. Is this the thing that you guys have been like agonizing over because now you suddenly have to make triple the amount of modules and they have to go in like every single system, or is it not quite hit yet?
Well, I mean, in the beginning, it was a big pain to build them because we didn't have the blueprints were super expensive and the materials, all that kind of stuff. Right now, we're lucky enough that we don't have to Sinojam a whole bunch of stuff. Our systems are in generally not Sinojammed, so we don't have to deal with that very much. But if you're a alliance or coalition under attack and you have to actively be turning those things on and off all the time, it could be a huge pain in the butt. But we luckily haven't run into that scenario yet.
There's a simplicity to how they're defended. There's also a simplicity to how they're also attacked. So an attacking force arguably could hit them a little easier, while they can actually also be defended a little easier because pause guns famously couldn't kill anything. Whereas if you have these things on a keep star or even a fortizar, you could lose a lot of shit. I will say this: if we had these Tenebrex Sinojammers in World War B, we would not have kicked goons out. It just would not have happened.
All right, well that's quite the hot take there. Let's focus a little bit more on one of the regions in which World War B took place, and that is Pureblind, because Pureblind is a content hotbed, if you will, of EVE Online. Has been for a long time. Pandemic Horde used to live there; they've since moved out. But the newest residents, or at least the newest entrants, Triumvirate, who used to hold space which now belongs, the majority of which, to Skill Yourself and Fraternity Dot, moved up into Pureblind. And to recap, if you missed the story so far, if you will, Triumvirate moved up. They had a lot of struggles getting moved in. Eventually they made their way in, though, and started getting a foothold down. Then things got a lot easier for them when Triumvirate moved away.
You cut off
Pardon
there,
me.
Artemis.
Things got a lot easier for them when Snuffed Out moved away and shifted their focus elsewhere in Losec. But now Triumvirate has a foothold, and Snuff are back. And also the Initiative have made their way through the Brisk Gate, if you will, and they're rearing to go. They wanna get some fights happening, and so content has started to get kicked up in Pureblind. We've seen not only Triumvirate, they're also allied with Combat Wombat down in here. We've seen them fighting with and alongside the Weekend Warriors. But we've also seen them contacting their old friends in Pandemic Legion and even Northern Coalition in the past. And one fight I want to highlight that took place just before the show was a fight over in Ewok TAC K, an entrance system, or pardon me, a pipe system in Pure Blind. And Panda, you were on this fleet, so walk me through. Like, this is the battle report we're looking at on stream. Looks like we have the Bastion, Initiative, Snuffed Out are there. They have about 140 dudes, and then Combat Wombat and Pandemic Legion on the other side with around 150. What was it like? What's the lead up to this thing?
I mean, by the time we got there, a lot of it had already taken place, I guess. There was still a bunch of harpies there, and as you can see from the combat reports, the PL were in Munins. So it was, I guess, from what I saw on grid, I'm not an FC. It was kind of just clearing up a little bit by the time we arrived. I suppose there'd been sort of other things going on at the same time. So it'd been a busy night anyway.
A busy night indeed. In fact, if we look at the kill board for Pure Blind, I was looking at this before the show, and I noticed that two staging Fortizars for sure, and one Fortizar with only a clone bay have all died within the last week. I'll be pulling those kill mills up for the stream here shortly. But we had Triumvirate lost a staging Fortizar, Northern Coalition lost a Fortizar, and also it was, I forget the third. Let me. To cut a long story short, though,
isn't there a lot of like unanchoring and kind of trimming the fat in that area as well? Just kind of ramping up.
yeah, we're actually going to talk about that in a minute here because there was an interesting post about a retreat happening from Tribute that has a lot of people riled up. But we'll chat about that in a minute. So it was Northern Coalition lost to Fortizar in the system of X47. Some may know from the old Keepstar fight there. Then Triumvirate lost their Fortizar in 12VA or 12YA, pardon me. And then it was the Weekend Warriors who lost their Fortizar with only a cloning bay. But definitely some fighting going down in Pure Blind. Doesn't look like it started to hit Sov too hard yet. We had some Sov timers happening during the show, in fact. But it looks like the Defender timers just naturally regen, so fighting isn't happening over Fozzie Sov mechanics just now. It's mostly fights over structures. So let's talk about this allegation that the Imperium hasn't even announced that they're going to war yet, and Northern Coalition and Pandemic Legion are already evacuating from Tribute, because that is the spin that I'm seeing everywhere, and I'm not quite sold on it yet. But then again, I don't have any inside information. So Ron, can you give me like overview from an outsider's perspective? You have semi ties to both organizations. What's the deal here? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is just spin, right? So uh, when and the logistics guys can tell you that at any given time there are a massive amount of structures that you've forgotten about that are used by a corp that has moved out, and it's just a lot of cleanup, right? So you can they're starting to look at the area, and they're just cleaning up a lot of stuff and unanchoring things that they don't need, and just instead of just giving kind of free wins, right? Let's clean it up and maybe anchor some new ones or that kind of thing. But there's no sense in just throwing things into the fire, right? So the spin is, oh, evacuating this and that, but I see it as logistics guys saying, all right, well, if they're going to attack here, let's take another look at this area. What do we not need here? What is not important? What is not fitted, right? Like, let's just get rid of that and make sure everything is clean before we start the fight.
And for the has it been announced? Has the Imperium announced like where they're going at? I think the State of the Unions on Saturday, isn't it? So nobody even knows. I mean, they can only go one of two directions. They can go north or they can go east. So there's kind of a 50-50 chance they're going towards Tribute. But in any case, I'm a biased observer in this particular case, so I can't really give an opinion. But I'm super excited because the MTAC-O Keepstar is currently on anchoring, and so I'm hoping that Mercenary Coalition will no longer be the only alliance in history to lose a Keepstar to accidentally unanchoring. It'll be great. I'm wondering who has control over that re-anchor button. Just curious. But in any case, that's what's happening in Eve right now. We have fighting going on in the south. It's mostly skirmishy stuff, not hitting Sov too much. We've got fighting going on in Pure Blind, with Snuff moving back in and starting to call the herd, if you will. We'll see if Triumvirate and the local entities can manage to keep their stake in the area. And then we've also got possible war brewing, with the Imperium having a State of the Union happening sometime this weekend. I don't know the exact time, to be honest with you. And reportedly, Tribute is being evacuated in anticipation, but take that with a massive grain of salt. And of course, there's fighting happening everywhere as well. I've been on fleets with Pandemic Horde. We've been going around because the fighting is still happening in the Spire. There's really, like, spaceships are blowing up everywhere. And our fantastic guests on the show that we had today, Dunk Dinkle from Brave Newbies, Nydia Masters from Pandemic Horde, Panda Salette from Pandemic Legion, are the guys who are behind the scenes, behind the curtain, if you will, making sure that ships are on contract, making sure that jump gates are fueled, and that everybody can actually have fun and blow up those ships. So thanks for being on the show, and thanks for doing what you guys do every day.
Well, it's a pleasure to be on the show. Thank you all. Hopefully to see some of you at Eve Down Under and Eve Toronto and Eve Vegas this year.
Yeah,
Indeed.
definitely. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's been fun.
My shout out is actually going to you three and all of the other logistics, Alliance Logistics dudes who do the things, even the other people in your support group who help you run day-to-day life, because it is a monumental task that you accomplish. So shout out to you guys. Ron, you have a shout out for us today?
My shout out is to all the logistics guys that blacklist people that take advantage of the market, because those people need to be dragged out on the street and beaten. I hate that crap, that relisting stuff. Oh, that's just one of my things, though.
Are they above or below high sec gankers and war deckers? And how does it rank on the Ron levels of hell?
You know, man, they're below wormholers, but they're above high sec war deckers. But they're right in there, right in there.
Dunk, you got a shout out for us today?
My shout out is to Mrs. Dinkle, who puts up with all this crap.
All right, Nydia?
I'll just shout out to the rest of my team that, you know, some days they do a decent job, and that's.
Woo! All right. Panda, you got a shout out for us?
All the farmer MC dudes.
Reforming into MC 3.0?
We're slowly all taking over into PL. Well, soon I'll be there again.
Oh, good times. All right. Well, as a reminder, today's show is sponsored by fuzzworks.co.uk/things. That is FUZZ work.co.uk/things. It's a fantastic site. For the record, your votes mean nothing, and CCP is in no way obligated to do anything that is recommended on this site. But it's a way for you to voice your opinion, get your ideas out there, and see how the community responds to them. So you can upvote an idea, you can say no, I don't like that idea, or you can say, meh, nobody actually cares about your stupid idea, go away. So that's a thing. Definitely go
just a
check it.
reminder, your votes mean nothing. Oh, I like that.
It's useful knowledge in case people feel entitled. In any case, that'll do it for this week's episode of Talking in Stations. This was Season 2, Episode 12. We will be back here again next week at our normal time, 0100 UTC, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard. Today recorded a little bit early, so I thank our guests for bearing with us on that one. And of course, we'll be here on Sunday at 1600 UTC for the Sunday show.